Massive protests in Hong Kong are making Carrie Lam cry. And I sit down with one of Hong Kong's biggest pop stars to discuss Hong Kong's future. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Okay, I have a message to the hundreds of thousands of protesters in Hong Kong who are upset about Beijing destroying their freedoms. You've gone too far. You've made poor Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam cry.
話我賣港.
Some people say I'm betraying Hong Kong. How can I betray Hong Kong? I was born and raised here. I was growing up here with all the Hong Kong people.
我對呢個地方嘅愛.
That poor woman is just trying her hardest to make Beijing happy, and you keep asking her to step down. Have you ever tried walking a mile in her shoes, huh? Well, so you know how it feels to cry, she allowed Hong Kong police to shoot tear gas at protesters. And if that doesn't make you cry, the pepper spray and rubber bullets will do the job. Hong Kong police have been kicking around some other great ideas too. Wow, that's some good leadership, Carrie Lam. Don't feel too bad though, because the Chinese Communist Party's got your back.
China's central government will continue its firm support for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government to push forward with its amendments of the two extradition bills.
Those extradition bills are the reason 1 million people protested over the weekend. If they get passed, Chinese authorities could in some cases order Hong Kong authorities to arrest and deport suspected criminals to mainland China. The Hong Kong legislature was supposed to debate the bill on Wednesday, but these pesky protesters got in the way. Look, those barricades are there for a reason, to block off the protest area right outside the legislature. Well, that plan clearly didn't work. At least 20 people were injured and the extradition bill debate has been delayed. Carrie Lam is calling the protests organized riots. And July 1st will be the anniversary of the 1997 British handover of Hong Kong to the Chinese Communist Party. That's just a couple of weeks away, so it's possible these protests won't be ending anytime soon. Now, in 2014, police also used tear gas on protesters, as well as some hefty violence. That resulted in a months-long occupation of downtown Hong Kong and international condemnation. So you'd think Hong Kong authorities would have learned their lesson, that maybe police brutality is not the way to deal with these kinds of issues. Protesters, on the other hand, have learned from the 2014 umbrella movement. Back then, they used umbrellas to block police pepper spray. They're doing that again this time too, just with better branding. There's a promo for the new Spider-Man Far From Home movie. And for some reason, I have a sudden urge to go to the 7-Eleven in Hong Kong. In fact, that's what I'll do. By the time you watch this, Matt and Shelley and I will have flown to Hong Kong to do interviews, live streaming, and umbrella shopping. And stay tuned right after the break, because I'll be sitting down with one of the biggest celebrities involved in the Hong Kong protests. Welcome back to China Uncensored. The protests in Hong Kong have reached across all segments of society, from students to lawyers to business leaders. And among them is one of Hong Kong's biggest music stars, Denise Ho. After she joined the umbrella movement 5 years ago, the Chinese regime canceled her tours in China and blocked her social media accounts. But that hasn't stopped her from standing up for human rights. I sat down with Denise Ho at the Oslo Freedom Forum a couple weeks ago to talk about the future of Hong Kong. Thanks for joining me today, Denise.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, recently, two people from Hong Kong have come out and said that they got asylum in Germany. How does it feel to have Hong Kong be a place that people get asylum from now?
Well, you know, it's pretty ironic that because right now we are in face of this extradition law that is, you know, the Hong Kong government is trying to impose on us, and you know, but next week actually we will be having a very big protest in Hong Kong. So you know, we are fighting still after 5 years from the umbrella movement, even though it's a pretty dim situation right now in Hong Kong, since like we try to shout out our opinions, but the Hong Kong government is just not listening.
Do you think it's possible to get a fair trial in Hong Kong now? I mean, there's been legislators who have been kicked out of office, umbrella movement leaders who have been arrested and detained. Is the court still free?
Well, it really depends, which judge you get.
Okay.
Well, that is my opinion. Like if you are lucky, fortunate enough, then you might get a judge that is unbiased, and then he or she would probably, look at the facts. But from my point of view, I think that some of the trials that went on during these 5 years were quite biased. And say for the Mongkok fishball revolution, you heard of it?
I have.
Yeah.
Why don't you say further?
Well, yeah, for the Mongkok fishball revolution, there were students and young generations who were sentenced for up to 7 or 8 years. So, I mean, they probably had to be prosecuted, for the hassle that happened that night. But is it fair to have such a heavy sentence? And we compare it a lot to what happened in 1967 when there was a revolution back then with homemade bombs and all that, and even back then the sentences were not as strong as it is now. So and just recently the Umbrella 9, the activists who were involved in the Umbrella movement, they were prosecuted and also sentenced for a lesser sentence, but still, they were sentenced for half a year or so. But the fact is, the Umbrella movement was not really started because of them. They were just put onto the stage, just for intimidating, the Hong Kong people, so that we won't, get into another revolution like the Umbrella movement. Yeah.
And I know you were one of the few cantopop singers who openly came out in support of the Umbrella movement. And at the time, the South China Morning Post said that was career suicide. So what made you do that?
It was the moment when I saw the police throw the 87 tear gas bombs onto the peaceful protesters that, I was just so angry at that moment. Because, it might seem not much, for other places where you get tear gas bombed all the time. But for Hong Kong, we never saw, such a harsh reaction from the government. And, the fact that the people who were on the streets, they were just everyday normal people. They had nothing, they had no weapons whatsoever. And for the police to react in such a way, it was so, we got so angry and we were so frustrated, and the emotions that came out that day. And on that moment, I decided, just I don't care anymore, about what repercussions that might come if I spoke out. Yeah.
So was it career suicide?
Half.
Half suicide.
Half, suicide on the glamorous and extravagant side, where I would get commercials and the easy revenue that came from China. That was totally cut off.
Yeah. You couldn't tour as much in China or at all.
I cannot even get into China. Okay. Yeah, I was banned totally, and I was labeled Hong Kong poison.
That's right.
Yeah. And but on the other hand, I started my revolution of my own in the entertainment business, and and in 2016, when I was supposed to have a concert in the Hong Kong Coliseum, the biggest venue in Hong Kong. And normally you would have sponsors, backing you up, buying some of the tickets. and I got none of that. So what I did was I started a campaign to crowd sponsor the concert, and I broke up. If like normally the sponsorships would be 1 million Hong Kong dollars, then I broke it up into super small pieces, and I offered it to local businesses. And in the end, we got 300 local businesses who backed us, and also 50,000 tickets sold out in hours.
That's incredible. I almost wish more Western businesses would hear that, so they might think twice about like, oh, there are options besides just catering
they
into
are.
mainland
They
China.
are actually. Well, on the other hand, it's because I have a strong fan base. So I was pretty confident that even when I'm banned from China, they would be supporting me. But the key is, you have to be really flexible. Like you cannot ride on the old ways, and you have to play a completely different game from what the traditional music scene is doing. Yeah.
Well, considering the levels of influence the Chinese Communist Party is having in Hong Kong, have you ever considered singing mainly in Mandarin?
Well, I did release 2 Mandarin albums, but that was mainly for Taiwan, the Taiwan market. And also before the umbrella movement, I was touring in China. I had this theater piece called, what was it called? 家宝玉, 家宝玉. Yeah, and it was space.
The Dream of Black Mansion, Red Mansions?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I toured for 3 years in different cities of China, and I actually gathered, quite a number of fans during the pre-umbrella movement years. So the thing that I feel it's a shame is that I cannot reach these fans as much right now, but they get through. They find ways to get in touch with me.
Oh.
Yeah, they have the VPNs
Yeah.
in China, and they just use that, and you see all these comments on Instagram, Facebook, and they are the support from China, but also at the same time we call them the 50 cents, like those who
on China Uncensored we know all
yeah,
about the 50 Cent
but
Army.
it's quite ironic because they have to get through the war to come
onto platforms banned in China to criticize you.
Yes, that is funny at some
Well,
point,
to criticize Hong Kong poison, it's worth it. So I know your family originally fled China to Hong Kong to escape the Chinese Communist Party, and when it got close to the handover, they went to Quebec, right?
Yes.
Why did you go back to Hong Kong?
Well, this is something that my dad always, he's on me all the time, because they used up a sum of money for us to get away from Hong Kong, and then I was the reason that now everyone is back in Hong Kong because of me. So, but the reason why I decided to go back to Hong Kong was my attachment to the Cantonese, the Canto pop music scene, as my childhood teenage idol was the Canto pop diva Anita Mui. And so in 1996, I decided to get back to Hong Kong to do the contest that she did 15 years ago. And by accident, I won.
What do you mean by accident?
I was just a fan chasing my idol, and I just wanted to, get in touch with her, try to get a glimpse of her. But of course, I really loved singing and performing, and but the main reason was because I wanted to see my idol. Yeah. So, but fate happened, and I won, and so I stayed in Hong Kong since 1997. So I went back from 1997, and I started my music career since then. How many years ago? 15, 20-ish? Yeah.
I know after the umbrella movement ended, there was sort of this idea that the young people of Hong Kong gave up or they were defeated. Is that true?
In a way, yes. Like it was quite gloomy and difficult, very, very difficult 5 years. I mean, at first, I think the first 2 years, people were still fighting. Like people got really angry and frustrated, and so there were different ways. You know, some people got very violent, and well, violent in a Hong Kong way, and you know, they were quite heavily criticized by you know, the pro-Beijing parties, which, you know, they used that as, you know, a tool to
Sort of a smear everyone.
yes, yes, and so that was when the prosecution and, you know, the political reprisal happened, and you know, all those names that were detained and arrested on during the umbrella movement, some of them were jailed, and then some of them were you know, sentenced to different periods of time, and these 2 years, like it's been quite depressing, a depressing time for the Hong Kong people, and especially the younger generations. Like I have friends with families who chose to leave once again the city, like, you know, like when my family did in the 80s. And you know, most of them are young families with young children, because, you know, it's I could understand, you know, I could relate to them, because if I had children right now, I would be quite worried, you know, about what education they would be getting from the, you know, communist Hong Kong government. And you know, there are much lesser discussion about, you know, what people should do in these times, because, you know, in a way, we have tried a lot of things and it just didn't work, because we don't have the democracy system that we wish we had. And so the Hong Kong government, they just do what they want. You know, they are not listening, and you know, they are passing laws quite unjustifiably, and they're changing laws in favor of the Beijing government.
Well, with the new extradition law, has that changed how people feel? Because I know there was another big protest that happened because of that.
Yes. In a way, yes. You know, the discussions are warming up now. And, you know, personally, I hope that, you know, after these different periods of frustration, disappointment, that people would come to realize that this is a very long war. You know, this is a very long battle that cannot be won, a very long battle that cannot be won, you know, just within 1 or 2 years. It's a very difficult process. And I think, you know, Hong Kong people are learning, and we are a population that is educated to be quick and, you know, instantaneous. So, you know, this thought and notion of patience is just not we're just very not accustomed to that. So, like, we are learning to be more patient and to work our way through these very difficult issues. And yeah, just a few weeks ago, we had the first protest for the extradition law. And, you know, that was since the umbrella movement, that was the first time that the number of people surpassed 100,000. And, you know, that is encouraging, you know, for those who had been, you know, still working hard at it. And so we hopefully, you know, the next protest on the 9th of June, it would gather more people. And even though, you know, we know that a protest might not change a lot of things, but, you know, personally, I think it is a form of unity and where people can see each other, and then we can get back into that notion of we are not alone, and we are still here, we are still numbered, and something can still be done.
What kind of support for Hong Kong would you like to see in the international community?
Well, as someone who has been banned and rejected by global brands, I think there is power in international unity, because what I see is people are afraid of losing the China market, so brands and businesses, they choose to not speak out, and they choose to stand on the side of money. So I think if the international market, they realize that there are other choices. I don't mean we have to ignore the China market. That is just part of the international market. And so when people realize that that is not the only choice, and we have more important values and things that we should focus on, I think that might gradually be a force that we could rely on each other to gain back some of the values and the virtues that are so important to us.
So where do you see Hong Kong in 2047?
In 2047, that's
the big year.
Yeah, that is that is something that I really have no answer for. I know what the reality is, but at the same time, I am still optimistic in a way that I mean, even the tyrants, the big machines, there are people behind it, and so in a way, people make mistakes, and people make decisions that drive things in various ways. So now, like, how many years we have? 20-ish?
I can't do that, man.
Yeah. And, so a lot could happen in this period of time. And I try to stay not positive, but optimistic, And, I mean, we have to keep this optimism. We have to keep this, this thought that we can make a change, even though it might be baby steps. But I think, the power is really within the people. And if we do not give up, then, who knows? Maybe something would change along the way.
Well, I think that's a great note to end this interview on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And, keep up the good work in Hong Kong.
Okay. Thank you.